Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Steel Mint Engage, a 5-day webinar series which would cover a broad spectrum of topics ranging from iron ore, coal, scrap, and steel. We're holding Engage to understand the perspective of industry leaders on various topics identified for discussion and enable our clients to have a better understanding on how each sector is likely to pan out in the near future. The co-host of the webinar today is Nitish Shukul, who has the steel vertical.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm Madhumita Mukherjee, editor, Steel Mint. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our esteemed sponsors for the event, NMDC and Tata Steel and Rumta Steel. In this session, our topic is, what does China's steel production cuts mean for global markets? My guest this afternoon is Ms. Hongmei Li, Head of English Editorial at MySteel. China's unprecedented power crisis is having a direct fallout on the steel industry globally. The Chinese government recently issued a notice unveiling staggered or phased production cut schedules in the iron and steel industry for the upcoming heating season of 2021-22 in Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, and surrounding areas. The policy, as per Steel Mint's estimates, can reduce crude steel production in the regions mentioned by almost 28 million tons over the first quarter of CY22. People say this policy is especially targeted at the steel industry, which shows how serious the Chinese government is about crude steel output reduction and is determined to implement pollution control measures to improve air quality. Because of the coal and power crisis, many power-intensive electric arc furnaces have closed down. So going forward, what are the implications of the strict production curbing measures for the global markets? We will learn a lot on this topic from our esteemed speaker, Ms. Hongmei Li, Head of English Editorial at MySteel. Ms. Li is proficient in both English and Chinese. She has been covering industrial and bulk commodities news since 2004. She joined MySteel Global in October 2017, and prior to that had worked as senior editor at Platts, senior editor in Fast Markets, and senior correspondent in Metal Bulletin. China has been the primary market, but she has also been covering news related to Australia, Brazil, South Africa, Taiwan, and the ASEAN countries. Welcome to Steel Mint Engage, Ms. Li. Over to you completely now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Ms. Mukherjee. And also really a great honor for me again to present at Steel Mint event. And then I think the timing couldn't even be better because we just have all the numbers from China regarding the output as well economic performance and the foreign trade. So it's a very timely manner in a way that we'll be able to discuss the market situation. So I know that the time is precious for everyone. So I just go ahead with my presentation without further delay. So I will be sharing my screen now. Hopefully you will be able to see my screen.
Yeah, we can see.
Yes, lovely. Okay, so the presentation today, the topic will be China's lower steel output and what kind of impact it will be on the global market. I will just, I know, already mentioned about the company and everything. So a couple of times in my previous presentation, so I skip this part, but I believe all of you will be having a copy of my presentation. Do look out if you're interested. And today, really the sharing, I presented in such a way that it have been added in a lot of my personal observation as well as personal opinions. So I have to put a disclaimer over there. Today's topic will be focusing on two things. One is about what has happened so far in China's steel market, and then what has been the impact and will be the impact in the coming years as well. Hopefully I can finish my presentation in 15 minutes, and then we'll start with the Q&A session then. This is, in order to make it really concise, I only include one part. I think that would be relevant to Europe, US, even India, as well as ASEAN countries. This is a downstream industry of steel market in China, but this is representative in a way is that I think many, like even Toyota has been mentioning about the auto chips shortage. So looking at China, what is happening to China's auto market, a very similar situation. But okay, if you're looking at all the numbers, of course, still year-on-year incline instead of decreases. But if you're looking at the numbers, as I mentioned, highlighted in the red color, since September, actually, for China's auto sales, it down to a single-digit increase instead of double-digit. There are some, policy issues such as, the government has been stimulating the auto sales, especially for the new energy vehicles and such. Of course, it has something to do with the customers, the confidence, especially for the individual consumers, whenever they're now so confident about the market. Also, after a spree of buying cars, everyone thinking that public transportation will not be as safe, China has been more or less back to the normal situation. That's why, the auto sales has been affected as well. Again, also, if you look at the sales and production numbers, sales actually is slightly more than the production, which means that the inventories have been consumed. And so far, you didn't really see much about the supply of the auto into the market, but production has not been growing as much as the sales. That is a story to tell behind the data. But also do the comparison, year-on-year comparison, looking at China's auto exports, it almost more than doubled in the first 9 months. And also for the new energy vehicle sales, as well as the new energy vehicles production, and in particular electric cars. The latter two rows are more about the basic market. So it gives you a clear idea. The Chinese government actually has been strongly supporting and promoting new energy vehicles. This is not solely about the auto market. This is more like kind of, Chinese people like to play chess, Chinese chess. So this is kind of a one step. Every step has been planned in a way for the carbon emission peak by 2030, as well as net neutral by net zero by 2060. So cars play a very important role in the decarbonization drive as well. This is what I want to tell. But if you're looking at the overall percentage part, NEV is just a small percentage of the total auto sales. There is still room to grow. Now let's go back to just particularly talking about the steel market. Okay, so when I think in the first half, when we had a webinar, as well as on several occasions, people were still questioning the possibility of China cutting down the production or even lower the output on year for 2021. But so far until September, if you look at number, the progress has been made. I think many people still remember how much China's steel output grew in the first half, but in the past 3 months, especially since July, China's steel output has been down bit by bit, and now we are only looking at a 2% year-on-year growth. And I also analyzed the number. I mean, even based on the first 9 months, if you annualize the number, it's only about 1.07, 1.08 billion, which is more or less the same than last year. But do remember that we have another 3 months to go. So most probably, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that Beijing will hit the target, lowering the output on year. Peaking is another thing, is starting September, the peaking actually year-on-year comparison declined instead of increase. And then it happened in September. What happened? I think this is a very accurate picture showing that China, first of all, a lot of the steel making, majority, 90% is about blast furnace capacity. So the blast furnaces have been curbed, as well as sintering. So that's why if you look at the peaking output, it declined ahead of the steel output. That is one of the things I want to highlight. Even looking at the finished steel output, originally I mentioned that finished steel and the crude steel are different. But even if you're looking at the finished steel, it didn't really grow as much as before in the previous years. It is still growing, but the pace definitely is slowing as well. And for the China, for the coal output, actually, if you're looking at the coal, this including all the thermal coal as well as the coking coal. So we're not only talking about the steel market, but nowadays everyone putting focus on the energy crisis and everything. So I just include this part as well to show you that China's coal production is still growing, but the supply, couldn't really catch up with the demand. There are several reasons. I think there are some common elements. I will just mention a couple of things here. First of all, for many countries, because of the government stimulus efforts, a lot of industrial activities have been picked up in pace far more than the normal years. That's why all of a sudden you have the demand for energy, for coal, for the other energy products grow. But at the same time, the supply hasn't really been able to catch up with pace. That's why not only China nowadays looking at the energy crisis and trying to increase the production. Many other countries, Europe has been restarting coal mines as well. And so that is a typical example, like, all these kind of things is not really happening in China. Nowadays, we are very much like in a global market. And ROM is run-of-mine iron ore output. I only have the number up until August. So far this year, actually, mining industry has been benefiting a lot. Just now we mentioned coal mining, and then if you're looking at iron ore mining, same thing. The increases has been quite spectacular compared with the year before. So that is one thing I want to highlight as well. Now, I think this is more relevant to the Indian market as well. If you're looking at the finished steel exports and imports, so all the numbers in the bracket in the second column are the annualized numbers. Even though China's steel exports has been dwindling months and months because of China changing the export policy on May the 1st as well as August 1st, but so far we are still looking at a 30% increase. In the coming months, I believe it will be very much depending on the price competitiveness. If there is a market readily available outside China, and also the prices are really competitive, I believe China's steel exports will be increasing. Because, in general, in principle, China doesn't really encourage steel exports, but high-end steel products, if there is a need, China doesn't mind exporting if necessary. And sometimes policy is one thing. Another thing is pricing competitiveness for businessmen. It's a kind of a competition you can't really resist, right? So long as there is a kind of profit to gain, there will be some inclination to export. Another thing is looking at the finished steel imports. I don't think year-on-year comparison will be a good thing in a way. It's because that if you're looking at annualized number, it's not so bad because prior to 2020, for many years, China's steel imports kind of ranging between 10 to 12 million. So for this year, it was not bad at all. But it's just like, compared with last year, it looks rather pale because last year, China imported a lot of stuff because of the price competitiveness, because China was the only buyer. So year comparison is helpful, but sometimes do bear in mind, especially for kind of not so abnormal years such as 2020. Iron ore imports last year, it was 1.17 billion, but look at this year, it's already a decline year-on-year for 3%. And this decline actually, the volume into a negative zone in the year comparison since July. So also in the second half. So is it a kind of coincidence? I wouldn't say so, because iron ore is definitely very close correlated with the demand. And China's steel production started to decline in July. So I think it kind of in line with each other. And then this is a kind of rather coherent picture, right? Telling you the left side and right side, and then you get an idea. Coal imports. Coal imports is a bit different. China has been trying to import a lot of coal, but there are some obstacles. Okay, everyone knows about Australia, so let's I'm not talking about Australia anymore because so far China didn't really import much from Australia. But Mongolia is China's second largest supplier of coal. But COVID-19 actually disrupted the pace. Now and then the border need to be shut. Because of Mongolia's, the social health system and everything, they're so concerned whenever a case comes out. So that's why Mongolia exports has not been as smooth as last year as well. And other than that, Russia has been exporting a lot of coal. But other than that, many countries are struggling with the coal supply, or they want to buy more coal as well. India has been buying quite a bit of coal as well. So this is kind of decline. It's not only about China's demand. It's also about supply. So this is a story of demand and supply. And looking at the scrap imports, China reopened the door to steel scrap this year after consolidating and standardizing the quality and everything. And if you're looking at the numbers, so far, China nearly imported about 470,000 tons. Absolute number may not be very big because the other numbers we are looking at a million, right? But this number we are looking at 1,000 tons. But if you compare with last year, the same time for the first 9 months, China imported by about 18,000 tons. So it shows that by opening the door to China to scrap import, China did import a lot of scrap as a supplement to the iron ore. And this is a trend. I just want to remind everyone, this is a trend. But the thing is, whenever you are relying on the overseas market for supply, you are not only in the driver's seat, because the other have a strong say as well, whether they got cargoes available for you or not. So sometimes it's not only about whether you want to buy, it's about availability as well. So that's another thing I want to highlight in this. So I will go into highlight a few things. As I mentioned, China's monthly steel output started falling on year since July. I think very much. The other day, actually, when I shared my post in LinkedIn, one of my LinkedIn friends actually mentioned that Hongmei, you did mention that China's steel output could decline, in the second half, but no one think that will be happening. But actually, it is happening. Why? Because back then I already mentioned China need to monitor the economic performance to make sure that the GDP minimum target will be met before they can really crack down on the steel output and everything, because steel is not only about steel. Steel is more about infrastructure, construction, property market, and auto manufacturing, home appliances, many other downstreams. So when you cut down on the steel, you need to look at your overall economic performance. And then once you're comfortable with whatever you have achieved, and then you will do whatever you want to do. But this also shows that from the very beginning, China's ministries were saying that they will make sure that steel output for 2021 will be lower than 2020. So what I want to say is that Beijing has a very strong execution power. Do not doubt, do not really, being suspicious, thinking whether it's feasible or not. Nowadays, I do realize the government, the latest, the new government has a very strong execution power. What it promises, it delivers. So that is one thing I want to highlight. And so far, if you're looking at China's GDP growth until September, which means the second quarter, because China follow the calendar year, so they already achieve a 9.8% GDP growth year on year. And for this year, there's no maximum target, there is a minimum target. Minimum target is 6% year on year growth. And then for me, even though I'm not really economist or anything, but from what has happening, I believe that China, the target is rather feasible and achievable. China is confident that the target will be hit. And another thing is not only about that, in the past 2 years of COVID-19 struggling, China, putting everything under control. China is still not very much opening the door to the foreigners, unless you are going on a business trip, essential business trip in China. So I haven't been able to go back to China for the past 2 years as well. So I can tell you that is really true happening. China controlling the border really very stringently. But bit by bit, the benefit of the dual circulation, especially your domestic market share, is huge. Is that you still be able to running as per normal, and in general. So China also shifting the economic development model back to consumption oriented instead of focusing on investment and as well as in infrastructure. So until September, by the official number suggesting that China's GDP growth above 60% actually contributed by consumption, which means it's already back to the normal track and focusing on the consumption. And if looking at the coming months, for the rest of the year or even the first quarter, what we're looking at, I think that steel demand will be in a very mixed context, but in general, there could be a slowdown. Because if you're looking at, the sectors, machinery, manufacturing coming down, home appliances coming down, auto manufacturing slowing down, construction, depending on whether you're looking at the property market or infrastructure. So property market definitely is not really as robust as the previous few months. So it will be coming down again. But how to quantify everything, and then you need to do the really calculate the thorough calculation to come up with something. But the good thing is, I think World Steel Association helped us. So in the short range outlook released in October, just a couple of days ago, World Steel Association mentioned that China's steel apparent steel demand will come down, will decrease by 1% year-on-year, and next year it will be flat. So that is at least a kind of indication to tell you what people outside China in this particular market, very, knowing the market rather well, how they view about the market. And then I tend to agree as well. I wouldn't say that flat, because for such a big country, you never know, being a kind of flat year is rather tricky. But I believe, in general, China's steel demand will slow down in growth for sure. Then another thing is that, I want to mention is that energy consumption. Why I'm mentioning the energy consumption is because that, even though you're looking at a year comparison, China trying to generate as much power as possible, and also coal-fired power generation accounted, quite high. Originally, China trying to control the coal-fired power below 60%. Having more other energies to fill up the space. But because of the crunch for the time being, coal is still the best option. And that's why, China has been trying to increase the coal production, as well as encouraging powerhouses to increase the generation. One more thing I want to highlight is it's not like China having problem about the installation capacity of power generation. It's not about that. It's more about the coal prices are just too high. So for powerhouses, the more electricity they generate, the more losses they are facing. So they don't have the inclination to generate too much power. That's why China opened up the coal prices to some extent. They mentioned that for non-essential, which is it has nothing to do with household, critical industries, as well as central heating. Basically, powerhouses can just raise the charges, by a maximum 20%. And also mentioned for power-intensive enterprises such as steel mills, there's no limit. So they can charge whatever they want to. And another thing is that I think, people look at steel output just for this year. But I think, again, as I mentioned, Chinese chess. So this is just one of the steps for China to reduce the carbon emission from the steel industry starting this year, because this year is a new year of China's steel market as well as the industry going into the decarbonization years. That's why China need to cut down on the steel production. After all, power and the steel industry are the top two contributors to the carbon emission. That is another thing. But of course, what is struggling is that because of the COVID-19, right? Sometimes the government is in dilemma because you want to boost your domestic economy and also infrastructure, which will be leading to higher steel demand. But if you want to cut the output too much, it will be either your steel prices will be shooting up all the way, or your downstream industries will be suffering without enough supply and everything. So that's why China, waiting for the timeline and also the performance until the second half to make sure everything's all right, and then they step down on the brake. That's another thing. But of course, what is facing now is that once the output comes down, the steel margin will be coming up, because all of a sudden you don't have that much output. But if your demand didn't really dwindle or didn't really decline as per in line with the output, and then the steel prices will be coming up. But higher steel margins will be making it harder for the government to control the output, as well as push forward the mergers and acquisitions in order to increase the concentration in the Chinese steel industry. But so far, we haven't really in such a kind of danger zone yet, because the steel prices, so far this year, the record high is in mid-May. And looking at the rebar prices, just on top of my head, now we are still about 600 RMB away from the all-time high. So there's not so high steel margins to speak of. And that's why the danger is not really there. And the steel mills nowadays will be adhere to whatever the government requests them to do. And another thing is because of the power rationing, right, there's not so much you can do. Because of course you have your own powerhouses, but at the same time, you do need the national grid supply in order to charge and in order to operate. And now we're talking about a global impact. So if you look at 2020, again, I need to remind everyone, 2020 was not a good year. You know, the contribution from China to the whole world's steel output is about 58%. But so far this year until August, because I haven't really seen the association numbers for September yet, but until August, the contribution from China declined to about 55.5. And also I'm thinking, I suspect that for the September, the contribution could be even lower because, you know, because the sharp decline, and also month on month, China's steel output coming down, whereas the other countries are catching up, which means that China's proportion will be coming down as well. And another thing is, I think I just want to remind everyone, you know, do not really be worried about China's steel output or export all the time, because I have to tell you that export is no longer the target. Whereas I think starting last year or earlier this year, I already mentioned that China is turning itself into a trading hub, which means that China will be exporting and importing steel products to its needs. Sometimes it's because of pressing competitiveness. Sometimes it's because that overseas the semis, you know, or the finished steels, such as HRC, you know, it could be more affordable than domestic supplies. And China would like to import just for the steel mills or downstream industry to control the cost. So for China, you know, China is very open to the idea. And regarding the taxation and everything, it has removed all the rebate, you know, on the part regarding all those kind of rather commercial grade products. So what it means is, it means in the future you will see, you know, the commercial grade steel not so much from China, and then the global supply chain need to change. There will be some newcomers into the market to fill up that gap. And also China could be, you know, turning itself into an importer. I wouldn't say net imports, that's still very far away, but China definitely will be importing a lot more. So China's role in the global steel market will be changing as well. Another thing is that if you're looking at iron ore, China in general, in absolute volume, I think the demand for iron ore will ease. We're looking at the quantity, but not the quality. So the quality, China will be more selective. Because of the carbon emission drive and everything, it will be shifted towards higher grade, low impurity, especially those impurities that is not so eco-friendly, right? Such as sulfur. So low impurities and also scrap. Scrap utilization will be increasing in the overall steel making, whether you're talking about blast furnaces or as well as electric arc furnaces. So for so far, I think more or less scrap contributing to about 20% of China's total steel making as a raw material, you know, other than the balance will be iron ore. But by 2025, China trying to increase the portion of scrap in steel making to 30%. And do remember, we're not only talking about electric arc furnaces, because it's not feasible in China just to replace every blast furnaces with electric arc furnaces. The efficiency will not be there, the quantity will not match. But technically and technologically is okay, you know, it's all right for China to increase the scrap in the blast furnace steelmaking process as well. And another thing is probably the imported coal import, the volume will increase, but I put maybe it's because it very much depending on the energy situation, demand and supply. And because of the past year and this year, China's stimulus actually boosted the demand in the downstream industries. Once everything cools down, you know, the consumption by the industrial enterprises will not be that much regarding the power supply. So, you know, the coal supply tightness will be eased in that way as well. But in the long term, for the cleaner energy consumption, China will be increasing oil and gas, even though they are all fossil energy, but China will be shifting from coal to less polluted or cleaner, such as natural gas is quite clean. So they are shifting from coal to oil and gas. Other than domestic drilling, they will be importing a lot more as well. So that's why I put properly in the bracket. Another thing is that I think, you know, for the global market, as well as, you know, with China's focusing on the electric cars, the global demand for other industrial materials, such as battery, such as copper, you know, such as aluminum, it will be increasing. alumina, bauxite. Of course, China have been encouraging the recycling in the non-ferrous industry as well. Using a lot more scrap in copper and aluminum for the metal production, which means that the whole market will change. You'll notice that people are grabbing more for nickel, copper, but at the same time, if possible, China, of course, will be open to the cooperation on the advanced technology development, such as hydrogen. Hydrogen is available, but it's just not affordable. So I think a while ago when I attended the press conference of a World Steel Association, the official over there also mentioned that the overall upgrading in the steel industry is not about one country. One country will not be able to conquer all the obstacles. So it's more about the cooperation. But of course, there will be some copyright issues, property, intellectual property rights and everything. So the cooperation will be hard to push. And also, you have your national interest and global interest and everything else and in your consideration. So what you want to do, what you want to prioritize. But in general, I think this will be boosting the cooperation, and China is willing to cooperate with the others regarding the technology development. And another thing is that, as I already mentioned, for the nickel, copper recently very interesting. South 32, I don't know how much you know about South 32. South 32 is a South African company that is very much well known in the manganese ore market, but recently actually it take up a 45 stake in Saragota. Saragota is one of the largest single copper mining body in South America. It shows that there are many companies that kind of identifying the new resources and going into investing in those new resources. That's another thing. So together with that, the global impact is also that China itself will be trying to reduce the steel intensity in construction of infrastructure facilities such as bridge, railway, or the other structure buildings and everything, and also trying to build like clean powerhouses such as windmills, solar, hydro, nuclear, all that kind of things, which will be triggering a new round of higher end steel demand. In Europe, the windmills already taking up quite a bit of proportion of the especially the special quality plate demand. So I think it will be it has been happening in China as well, and that the pace will be quickened, and which means that China's supply structure will change, the global demand structure will change. I think that is true in a way, is that when people are saying that whatever China buys is getting expensive because the country is so big, right? So in a way, is that China, as I mentioned, being a trading hub, it doesn't mind import so long as the price is making sense. So that is another potential global impact. Of course, do remember China mentioned about the dual circulation. Dual circulation means that focusing on domestic market first. So whatever it can produce domestically, that will be the priority. That's another thing. And one more thing is that because everyone is going towards this decarbonization path, for all the steel industries, including China, steel production costs will be higher, without saying, because you need to spend money in technology, you need to spend money in tariffs, and Europe already talking about the carbon border tariffs. So all those kind of things will be in a way increasing the overall the steel production cost in general. Whether it's if you're in Europe, it doesn't mean that you're cheaper. You're not, because your production costs, you are adopting more hydrogen in your energy consumption in steelmaking, so you are getting expensive as well. But towards the future, everyone looking at cleaner steel supply. Many people say they don't agree with green. There's no green in steelmaking. One way or another, it's polluting. But the steel industry is trying its very best to minimize whatever pollution it can. In the shipping industry and the mining companies, they are one step ahead. Looking at Rio Tinto, BHP, whenever you have time, just comb through their website. They have been investing quite a bit. BHP, Rio Tinto, Vale, FMG, driverless trucks, and then for the trucks, they are not using diesel anymore. They are shifting cleaner energies and everything, which means that the shipping company, the mining companies, they are tending towards clean energy as well. That will be affecting and that will be affecting the relationship, the supply chain. Not every company would like to buy from the super eco-friendly mining companies, but at much higher costs. So there will be a balance, and then there will be some restructuring in the industry as well in the long run. So it's nothing immediate yet, but it's happening. So this is just a summary after sharing with you about so many. I think I started calling 2021 as a new year for the global steel market in many aspects, even though we are still struggling with COVID-19. What I'm saying is because of the global steel market is changing. Why it's changing? Because of the technology, because of the supply, because of the demand and everything, and the supply chains upgrading as well. As I mentioned, like iron ore companies and everything, and geographic map of steel capacities will be changing. China is investing in overseas mining and steel projects. So in the future, the capacity in China will be reducing bit by bit, whereas overseas market capacities will be increasing. But as I mentioned, it will be cleaner, but it will be another round of battling against each other in the aspect of the cost. So the cost is, again, the center of the attention, and probably everyone will try to work towards that to make sure that your supply is still relevant, is still cost effective. Yeah, that's all from me. I don't know how much time I spent, but hopefully I cover all the major points. And then, back to you. Yeah, Ms. Mukherjee, thanks.
Thanks, Hongmei. Nitish, would you like to add anything?
Yes. So thanks, Hongmei. That was a very informative presentation at your end.
Absolutely.
So at the onset, I have a few questions. I just wanted to ask, how bad currently is the coal and power crisis in China? What we've been hearing is that the mills are facing a triple whammy of production cuts, coal shortage, power rationing. So how is this impacting the China's steel mills in terms of domestic pricing and profitability?
If you're looking at the coking coal and the coke, that will be easier that will be more relevant to us, right? If you're looking at the prices, actually prices coming down recently. It's more due to the steel output decline since July. So the situation is not so bad. And also because of the iron ore prices coming down. So in general, the steel production cost is still manageable. And China's steel mills in general, they are still within about 500, 600 gross margin in whatever steel products you are talking about. But if you're looking at the energy market, I think a couple of months ago, when China having this kind of a power supply shortage, I did write up a blog mentioning that, the power shortage I didn't really come across in the past more than 1 decade, because the last time I witnessed this, it was back in 2008, before the financial crisis. All of a sudden, you got the summer shutdown and office buildings asked to, the temperature of the air conditioning cannot be too low, that kind of thing, just to save power. So originally I thought it could be a China issue, but nowadays, if you're looking at the market, actually it's a whole global issue. And I would say that it's serious, but the situation is still within control. But of course, the government has been issuing a lot of measures, such as recently, we just did a story this morning, even the exchange actually capping the open interest, which means that just reduce the volatility and also reduce the speculative trading. And China has been increasing domestic coal supply. Hopefully by the end of this year, another like 55 million tons will be added. It's not really like China doesn't have the coal, but China shut down a lot of small scale coal mining because of its the safety and also as well as the pollution. But if some on the safety as well as pollution control things got solved, they can restart whenever necessary to refill the gap. So the situation I would say is serious, but it's getting better, and it's within control, definitely. Another thing, I think the coming winter will be a test, because coming winter is not only have the power, you need to have the central heating as well. But in China, some of the central heating is not done by coal, it's done by natural gas. So, I would, looking at all the measures Beijing already taking, the indication is that the situation is serious, but at the same time, with so many measures taking place, it shows that the market is within control. Yeah.
Hongmei, tell me something. This is the peak demand season, I guess, in China. So how is the domestic demand scenario like at present? And with all the power crisis and output cuts, are you all feeling a kind of a demand-supply mismatch anywhere now? At
You're
this
talking
juncture?
about steel. You're talking about steel or
Steel,
coal?
steel,
Okay.
steel.
The steel demand, okay, the demand surprisingly, October was not really that great. I think part of some of the reasons is that, you know, for the past year and this year, the first half, a lot of demand was boosted by the stimulus. So the stimulus normally, even look at the infrastructure project, normally, you know, when the money comes in, it will be about 3 to 5 years to build up the thing. So now we are in the middle of some of the projects, which means that the demand for steel already has been consumed. So that is one thing. Another thing also to do with that, once the money is now in, right, some of the projects will be slowing down. That is another thing. So it will be into a steady stage. At the same time, October is very, I wouldn't say funny. Funny is not the right word, sorry. For this year, October is also rather abnormal because just during the National Day holiday, that is early October, or over 1st to 7th, the 1st to 7th, you know, like Beijing snowed. I have never come across snow in Beijing in early October, never ever, because I stayed in Beijing for about 7 years before I migrated to Singapore. And then I also got friends in Beijing, but for the many years, we never seen snowing, even though it's just outskirts of Beijing. It's not really kind of downtown Beijing, but that is still rather surprising. So which means that when I was talking to friends in China, they were telling me that the government actually expecting a colder winter this year. And also I checked the weather forecast this morning, just by coincidence. And according to the weather forecast, in many parts of China, the temperature was 1 to 5 degrees lower than the previous years. So it seems indicating the winter is rather cold, which means that, you know, a while ago, actually, we have the Shanxi flooding, right? That never happened. That never happened to my knowledge as well in my whole life so far. So the abnormal weather conditions and everything disrupted the steel demand. That's why for October, the demand is not really that great. So I would say that, you know, the demand and the supply, there's not so much about mismatch. HRC coming down as well because home appliances and auto is no longer. Production is coming down as well because of the weather and everything. So there is not so much about mismatch. That's why, you know, the prices, there is no chance so far for it to just touch the multi-year high or the record high in May, because the market situation is totally different from October versus May. Yeah.
Right. And do you think the Evergrande crisis is going to have any kind of impact on the, you know, on the long products demand going forward, say over the next 3 months?
Okay, I think the Evergrande actually has been talked about in the market for quite long, and a lot of speculation as well. Evergrande also got a lot of overseas employees and offices. I believe that is, and also is one of the largest developer in China. But looking at the exposure, actually is quite manageable. I think recently the People's Bank of China had to address this question at the press conference, saying that Evergrande is just an individual case and then everything's still within control. The property market will not be affected too much. But if you look at the property sales and everything come down, and also developers seems that less enthusiastic in investing in new projects, but it's more to do with, okay, for consumers, right? You can't really buy a house all the time, right? And then, okay, you're looking at the situation, the economy is still not really 100% back to normal. There are still COVID-19 cases now and then. You still don't know what will be happening. So you will be cautious in a way, especially, of course, Evergrande case coming out, your sentiment, your confidence has been dampened. So for individual consumers, they will be more careful. But in general, China government saying that I'm not going to tighten the control, so the policy will remain as it is, and then the market will be stable. Yeah, so that is what I think. Yeah.
So Hongmei, you know, what we understand is that China's steel exports are still pretty high. I mean, in the first half of CY21, exports increased by roughly about 30% year on year. In July to September as well, exports were up by around 31% year on year. I mean, this is despite the withdrawal of export rebates in May and August. Although in September this dropped a little bit by around 3% month on month. So, I mean, why are the exports still so high? I mean, and which way do you see the exports are headed in the second half of this current year?
I think, as I mentioned, for the export market, even for the import market, you always got buyers and sellers, right? So even if China not willing to sell, but you got readily available buyers overseas market. And so I like the word about mismatch. So far, I think the global market still got some mismatch, because it's not really a free flow of the steel product globally, and also China changing the policy. So, and also many other countries actually stimulating the economy. So their steel demand is far, far higher than the normal year. And all of a sudden, like US steel, typical, I think before the COVID-19, there was a time US steel is struggling. And now US steel even expanding the capacity. So that's a typical example showing that, the demand actually has been triggered, stimulated by the government spending. But when every government is spending, your domestic steel supply is limited. Of course, there will be exports. So that's why I'm looking at China's exports. There is an over 30% increase. Japan is another example. If you look at Nippon Steel, JFE Steel, they have been prioritizing the domestic demand. So their export has been declining. There is a gap then. So who is going to fill up the gap? Logically speaking, China's products will be competitive enough, and also the quality is really up to standard. So there will be exports coming out. Yeah, even though I think everyone's struggling with the shipment and everything. Yeah.
Before we go over to our audience, I have two quick questions. One is there any update on the expected export tax? And secondly, what is the outlook on steel prices in China?
If you're looking at tax, okay, from my past years of many years of coverage, I would say the government will be very careful of imposing tax on your own products. We already have some very heavy taxes on semis. So semis basically no-go, and scrap as well. So you're not supposed to export scrap, but that is only out of necessity, unless it's really necessary. And also you have to look at your structure. For example, China definitely exporting a lot more flats than longs, and the flats are produced by the large size state-owned enterprises in China. So they got the message from Beijing. Sometimes a message from Beijing is more than enough. You don't really need to impose a tax on the steel products. That's how I view it, because I personally, I don't really, I'm not really for this kind of policy, but of course, it is, as I mentioned, depending on the necessity. If there is kind of flashing out of the products against Beijing's will, even though, the rebate is no longer there may be some policy changes, but I for the immediate future, I didn't really see that. Yeah. So for the steel prices, a typical example is that even though you're thinking that China is the largest steelmaking country, and then it's very much running independently, but at the same time, its prices has been influenced by the global market prices. Typical example is HRC. Starting last November, actually, HRC prices was even higher than rebar in China. Is, of course, domestic demand has some influence, but at the same time, global prices shooting up all the way. So that is lending some support to the HRC prices as well. But if you look at nowadays, China's own domestic prices is pretty much reasonable, considering all the costs from iron ore, from coking coal, from scrap. Now we are looking at 5,800, 5,700 for HRC or in rebar. The margin, normally the best way is looking at the margin. So the gross margin, 500-ish is pretty reasonable, because we're talking about the gross margin. There are some operational costs not really deducted. So for now, I would say for the time being, the prices are quite reasonable. Yeah.
So we can expect no export tax, at least, over the next, till the end of the current year. Because the market is always abuzz as to when this, tax is going to be imposed?
Yeah, I think this year one of the very hot topics about China is about export tax, right? So people are talking about April the 1st will be the one, and then turn out to be May the 1st. After August 1st, people talking about September, but it didn't happen. So as I mentioned, I think it's very much depending on give the government a bit of time. Even then, I think back to August when people were asking me, I was saying that government policy cannot really change so frequently. Even for me, many years of coverage, I never seen that the tax policy change, the steel policy change within like 3 months. But of course, we're looking at different products. So in a way that doesn't count. But I think it's still too early for the government to look into the export tax and everything, because most probably, this again is my personal view, 2020 and 2021 are abnormal years. So unless the years are past and Beijing review the situation and see how much is really actual demand by the global market and how much is simply because China trying to sell hard. And then Beijing will make the decision whether it's necessary. Because if the kind of global demand, there's not much you can do, right? You can't really block it. Even though you kind of, impose tax about 10%, 20%, looking at the price difference, it's still huge. China's HRC is about 1,000, but overseas market 1,500 or even higher. So there is margin. So you simply cannot, just blocking it. It's irrational thing, simply. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go over to our viewers now. We have quite a few questions. China, a guest user is saying, China witnessed an extremely strong H1, but with steel production cuts kicking in from November and slowing production since July, do you think it is accurate to analyze the Jan-September numbers with daily production sliding to 2.46 million tons? Do you still feel 2021 production growth will be 2%?
Okay, first of all, I don't think it's reasonable to using the Jan to September numbers to annualize, because we haven't really come across, because it will be more reasonable if, let's say, we use a July to September. That could be more accurate. But what I want to show is that even we annualize the number, even for the past, even for the next 3 months, the situation is just as this. We will not be producing much than 2020. So that is my point. But of course, for the next 3 months, the steel production will be coming down month and month. So I believe that China. That's why I'm saying China will be able to fulfill the target of a lower steel output for 2021. So September, the question is very right in a way, is that winter restrictions will be coming in on top of the other measures. So even if you're looking at the daily output nowadays is low, but it's not the lowest yet, because in the coming months, the daily output will be coming down even further. That's why I don't think there will be a growth about 2% at all. There will be a decline, but the decline will be modest. Yeah, that's how I view it.
We have one question from one of our participants. He is asking, what is the timeline for China extending the emission trading scheme to sectors like steel and aluminium rather than just power? And if ETS eventually covers steel as well as will Chinese steel investors be looking to invest in geographies with lesser carbon scrutiny? What is your take?
The timeline, I think the steel industry is by 2025, right? You said what the person is asking. Okay, looking at the China carbon emission peak is for the country itself is 2030, and for the steel industry is 2025. So for the net zero for the country is 2060. I suspect that for the other industries it will be earlier. 5 years could be, because by the look of it, it could well be on the agenda. But so far China hasn't really released. Do watch out for the policy changes starting next year, because China will be drafting for the industry, for the decarbonization or the carbon emission peak planning. Most probably they will be finalized the copy and then release it sometime in early 2022, because they did mention 3-year plan. So if you're looking at 3 years, right, normally China would like to conquer the stuff ahead of schedule. So 2022 will be the start. And then by then we'll know for sure. And yeah, So that will be the timeline. Definitely the heavy industries will be ahead of the national economy, because the national economy will be hard. It's about daily life as well. Like your car, you can't really convince your citizens change all the cars, especially if I just buy it 2 years ago. Why should I change? It's still pretty new. I get a very fancy brand. It's very costly. So that will be not as easy as conquer the target in the industry first, or the industries will be go. And also looking at the ranking, the powerhouses is the number one. Steel mills were the number two. Aluminum, non-ferrous metals, they are all very power consuming, but they are not really necessarily polluting. They are just very power intensive. That's the thing. So China is asking the industry to shift towards the scrap. That's the thing, because by using scrap, you will be saving the power consumption by 40% to 60%. So that is more about the non-ferrous industry. It's not so much about the pollution control. It's more about the power consumption. And then if you're looking at the investment thing, I believe, okay, there are two angles of perspective thinking on this. China has been investing quite a bit of steel assets in Europe, because Europe has an advanced technology, such as British Steel by Jingye, of course, and Hebei Iron Steel took this Serbian steel project. So geographically, depending on what you are looking for Europe, definitely looking at the technology and the cooperation opportunities. Whereas for the other investments, such as ASEAN, because the ASEAN countries are still with great market potential, and at the same time, so far, no country other than Singapore, no countries have been specifically mentioning what will be their net zero target yet. So if you got the market and also you don't have the kind of hardcore deadline, of course, the investments will be going to those markets. Yeah.
We do not have too much time, so I'll just take two quick questions from our viewers. One is from Saurabh Lond from Vandana Global. He wants to know, what are your views on the Chinese government intervention in coal trade market? How do you see coal prices behaving?
Okay, when China saying that I'm going to interfering or intervening in the coal prices, it did mention one more thing, is because for now, coal is with strategic importance. Why Chinese government want to intervene? Because central heating will be affecting millions of households. You can't afford not to have the central heating to North China. Another thing is power shortage. In South China, many provinces don't have the central heating. So people relying on the air conditioner. In China, air conditioner got cold air and hot air. So relying on the air conditioner for warming up the house. Then it falls back on the energy and on the power supply. And because of the structure of such, coal-fired powerhouses are the core contributor or the generator of the power. So that's why China has to intervene. Otherwise, the colder winter will be very hard. And in US, we heard people die in a cold winter, right? In China, it can't be happening. It shouldn't be happening. So that's why China intervene. It's not only about the too high prices. It's not about the trading and everything. It's more to do with stabilizing the supply, stabilizing the prices, and also make sure the power supply is sufficient. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the last question is, the thrust going forward will obviously be on value-added steel, green steel. So how much of that, like going forward, like to what extent will China be reducing commercial grade steel and making value-added part of the entire quantum? And how much of that is going to shift to India?
Okay.
Opportunities,
right. Commercial grade, looking at, there are several things I will put in such a way. Looking at China construction, they already upgraded the quality for rebar from HRB 400 to HRB 400E, which means that you have to withstand earthquake as well. So that is upgrading, which means that commercial grade has no use in China. And another thing is looking at Baowu actually recently looking at electrical steel sheets as well. And also they are also going into the aluminum alloy industry because of the automaking. So sometimes, your steel got drawbacks, right? You need to replace your steel with aluminum alloys. So the Baowu is going into that side as well, which means that some of the no grade or some commercial grade steel will be gone from the market. So the kind of upgrading has to happen together with your economy, because at the end of the day, it's the demand has a final say. If there is no demand, if the industrial standard raised, and then the commercial grade steel will be coming out of the market or out of the production, as simple as that. But Indian opportunity, I would say a couple of things. Iron ore definitely, but sadly or in reality, the government doesn't allow higher grade iron ore to export unless you want to pay the tax, right? They didn't say not allowed, but you need to pay hefty taxes if you want to. That is one thing. Another thing is about semis. So I think semis, the semi-finished steel, especially billet and the slabs, in the foreseeable future, China's steel structure consumption model is still more about longs than flats. So semis will be the opportunity for India as well. That's another thing. DRI, HBI, I think in the future, China will be looking at the possibility, but not so much because it's still not economical. China tried out the DRI, HBI a while ago, many years ago, using the FinTech and the Corex technology, but it's not economical. So that will be waiting a bit longer. Yeah, but even pig iron got opportunities because as I mentioned, China now is a trading hub. Thinking from that perspective, semis, the raw materials to some extent will definitely, China is willing to import if the quality is up to the standard and also is making sense in money, in cost. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, since you mentioned billets, I wanted to ask, Jan to September, year on year, imports are down at almost 29%. So what does this imply for an exporting country, a billet exporting country like India?
Okay, this is a kind of a mathematical question as well, because last year China imported a lot. So the base number for last year was too high. So if you really want to know the real situation, I think it would be making more sense if we compare with 2019. That may be making more sense. But again, another thing is about prices. So I don't think Indian prices, the billet prices have been staying the same. It has been surging, right? Because of the scrap, because of the iron ore, especially about the scrap. Scrap prices have been soaring to multi-year high as well. So the prices are no longer competitive compared with China's own billet. That actually affecting China's billet imports as well. So I think those will be the major two things I think we need to bear in mind. Yeah. Right. Thank you.
We just don't have any more time. A very big thank you, Hongmei, and a very big thank you to your viewers. And I hope everyone enjoyed the session. We would like to thank our sponsors, NMDC, Tata Steel, and Rumta Steel. We also want to thank Indian Steel Association and Steel Users Federation of India for their valuable support.